This is an experience that has been bothering me for years, so I felt I should finally post something about it in case it's helpful in some way. I used to live up in a subdivision in the middle of nowhere, north of Divide, Colorado. Our gravel street ended in a cul-de-sac, and we were the middle house of the three at the end of the street, which was on the side of a hill. Because we were pretty far away from anything, I was a latchkey kid, and usually was home alone for a few hours after school. This took place in the early 80s, when I was about 8 or 9 years old. One day, shortly after the bus dropped me off and I got home, I saw someone pull into the driveway. I didn't recognize him, so I hid behind our wood-burning stove in the corner. He came up and started instantly knocking on the door and looking in the window. He then strangely tried the doorknob. He just wouldn't stop knocking, so I came out thinking if this guy was a burglar and saw me, he would go away. When he saw me, he asked me, through the door which had a window pane, if I could open the door, and I replied that my dad was in the shower. He didn't react and said that he was here to see my neighbors, and he mentioned them by name. I told him they lived next door in the house on the left. He said okay, seemed a bit frustrated, but started walking away to his car. But instead of getting in his car, he started walking around my house. The house was built on the side of a hill, so it had a walkout basement. I started freaking out because, at this point, this wasn't normal, and I thought that he was going to try and get in through the sliding glass door in the basement, which was locked. I got ready to jet out of the door and into the woods, but then I saw him come up the other side of the house, get into his car, and tear out of my driveway up the gravel road. He never did go to my neighbors who he said he was looking for. Sobbing, I picked up the phone and called my neighbor halfway up the street who had a son my age and used to watch me sometimes. He had seen the car speed up the gravel road and told me to come over. So I took off, running through the woods to my neighbor's house, avoiding the road in case he turned around and came back. Of course, I told my parents, but I don't really think they let it sink in, and since my neighbors weren't home, they said he probably mistook the house. From my standpoint, I'm pretty sure if I opened the door, I would not be here today. No one randomly drives down my street, much less into a subdivision in the middle of the mountains where I lived, and I never saw the guy at my neighbor's house. I vaguely remember my parents asking my neighbors if they knew the guy, based on the description. He was a short white guy, round glasses, long brown hair, slightly balding, and a longish beard, but they didn't know who that might be. I've always felt like he knew I was there alone, based on his non-reaction to me saying that my dad was in the shower. He knew the layout of the house, which is why he walked down the side of the house to the walkout basement, and preferred not to leave any physical evidence, which is why he didn't break in. I'm not sure if my neighbors knew him or not, but because of the remoteness of the location and the fact that we played often in the woods, I'm pretty sure if I didn't get snatched, they would have chalked it up to me getting lost or hurt, wandering around. We moved out of the state a year or so later. We never heard of any other local kids going missing, but I can't believe that this guy didn't try to make someone else disappear. My mum and dad got divorced when I was around 2. I was young, so I don't really remember the actual separation. Their custody arrangement meant that my brother and I got to see my dad every other weekend. My dad had gotten remarried to my stepmom. We even got to spend longer periods of time in the summer with them. And this particular summer, I had just turned 11. We planned on going on a camping trip for about a week or so. We packed up the gear, got us and our dog Jackie in the car, and we decided to go camping down in California to a place that we had been before. My dad told me that people had occasionally seen bears, cougars, and other wildlife in the area where we were camping. When we got there, it was late in the afternoon. My brother and I were really excited to be there. We loved going camping, and it had been a long time since we had gone last. We were mostly looking forward to swimming in the lake, as it had been very hot that summer. After we had arrived at our camping spot, we began unloading all the camping supplies. We got our tent set up, coolers and food put all away. My stepmom and I decided to walk down to fill our water pouches at the spigot up the small road a little ways. Once we got there and started filling the pouches, I looked over to a campsite across the road from us. There were about 3 men occupying this site. 2 of them were standing around and the other one was sitting down next to the fire. They were drinking beers and obviously very intoxicated by how loud they were. One guy in particular locked eyes with me though. He was on the chubby side, had a dirty t-shirt, black cargo pants and a beer in his hand. I gave a small friendly smile and looked back up at my stepmom who was still filling her pouch. I looked back a few seconds later and he was still looking at me. I looked away and went back to filling my water pouch. The next time I looked over, he was still just staring. But now, he had a wide grin on his face. I started feeling very uncomfortable and couldn't look at his face anymore. That man across from us won't stop staring at me, I said to my stepmom. She glanced over at him, obviously noticing. She finished filling her water pouch. Just don't look. Come on, let's go back, she said. She and I walked back up the small road headed back to our camp. I looked back once more when I thought we were out of the man's eyesight from the trees and the bushes, and I didn't see him anymore. That night we had a quick dinner of hot dogs over the fire, played some Uno cards around the propane lamp and had a great night. After a while, it was getting late and we were pretty tired. My brother and I shared a tent, while my dad and my stepmom had shared their own. Our dog Jack slept in the tent with my brother and me. Not long after my brother and I had laid down in our sleeping bags, we both fell asleep. Waking right out of a deep sleep, I thought I heard something. I didn't know what they were at first. It took me a second to realize that there were footsteps outside of my tent. The sound of leaves and twigs breaking. A bear? Or maybe a cougar, I thought. Dad did say that they were seen before in this area. I looked over at my brother and my dog and they were still fast asleep. After a while, it didn't sound like treading of a wild animal though. The footsteps sounded heavy, like someone wearing heavy work boots. Whether it was a wild animal or not, all I could think to do was stay very still and be quiet. The sound of the steps were now circling the tent, and stopped right in front of it. For what felt like a minute, I heard nothing. My heart was beating really fast at this point. To my horror, I heard the zipper to the front of our tent starting to unzip. I quickly sat up, grabbed the flashlight right by me, moved to the far corner of the tent near my brother, and hugged my knees. Fear was ripping through me, to the point where my body wouldn't move though. What do I do? I remember thinking. I turned on my flashlight, pointing it at the door, hoping and praying that it would make this thing go away. The unzipping stopped for a second, but then it continued. My eyes were locked on the door. I saw a hand and then an arm reach into the tent. I was crying now, too terrified to do anything. And then I saw his head. It was that same fucking guy who was staring at me when we were filling the water pouches. He just stared at me with the same damn grin on his face. The man was now almost halfway in my tent, and I screamed. Right after that, my brother woke up looking confused and wondering what was happening. I heard my dog Jackie growling loudly. Jackie was growling, but not baring his teeth. Jackie was a medium-sized dog, but he was really protective of us. Jackie started barking loudly and making a lot of noise, and the man quickly backed out of the tent as Jackie chased him and ran after him. My dad and stepmom came into our tent shortly after. I told them everything that happened. My dad tried to catch up to the man, but he was gone. My dad came back a few minutes later with Jackie. Apparently Jackie had been barking at a fence, assuming that the man had jumped over it to get away. We told the park ranger and law enforcement everything the next morning. I shudder even now to think of what might have happened had Jackie not been sleeping in our tent that night. I don't know if the man wanted to just scare me, hurt me, or worse. but I'm glad I didn't get to find out. Now that I'm older, I still go camping from time to time, but I always carry some kind of protection and never go without my dog. When I was younger, I spent the day helping a neighbor rake leaves on his property. He was friendly with my family, so he walked me home to say hi to my parents. We walked into the house and heard my mum upstairs talking. It sounded like she was on the phone or something and walking around. I called for my dad. No answer. My neighbor says, "Well, sounds like your mum is on the phone. I'll catch them another time." We say goodbye and he leaves. I go upstairs to see my mum, but I can't seem to find her or hear her anymore. I search the house and it's empty. I'm thinking, did she leave the house while I was saying goodbye to the neighbor somehow? I call my dad's cell. My mum didn't have one, and he picks right up. I ask him where he is and if he knows where my mum went. We're at the store. We've been running errands for a couple of hours." As soon as he said this, I got instant goosebumps. My neighbor and I both heard footsteps upstairs and a woman's voice. I have no idea who or what it was, but we definitely both heard it. I waited outside until my parents got home.